right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to City Club's October Forum on 2023 Mayoral Debate. As you can see, we've got the spotlights on them, so it should be a fun day. I'm Dave Peppinger. I'm a City Club board member. I have the honor of introducing everyone today and definitely doing all the thank yous as well. So, City Club's mission is to bring people together and to inform and inspire them on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when discussing challenging issues. I don't think any are going to happen today, right? So before the introductions, let me get into some thank yous. First of all, thanks to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of our media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. MCAT occasionally live streams our forums on its local live platform as well. You can find videos from the past City Club forums by clicking on the videos button on our website on cityclubmissoula.com. Many thanks to our sponsors, especially those at the executive level. They're Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand the audience access and reliability planning and conducting our forum. We're grateful to our sponsors as well as our members, and we invite you to join them. Thank you to our board of directors and everyone that puts on this forum today. Our moderator today for today's debate is Laurel Staples. Laurel Staples joined NBC Montana's news anchor team in 2012. She previously worked for the CBS affiliate station in Butte and Bozeman, along with stations in Helena and Missoula in the early 90s. Laurel's the winner of the 2010 E.B. Craney Television Broadcaster of the Year Award and is part of NBC Montana news team that received the E.B. Craney Award for Television Newscast of the Year in 2020 and 2021, and runner-up for the Television Hard News Reporting for NBC Montana series on the Northern Border. Other awards include coverage of the Mansfield-Metcalf dinner in Butte featuring then presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and runner-up for the Program of the Year for Face the State, Evel Knievel. In addition to reporting and anchoring, Laurel, joined by her husband, Chris Line of the Line Ranch in Missoula, hosts NBC Montana Road Trippin' series. So with that said, Laurel, it's all you.
Can you hear me okay? Oh, that's good. All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave, and I'm very happy to be here. It's really nice to see some familiar faces here. Also, of course, I'm looking forward to hearing from our candidates, the same as everyone else here. Andrea Davis was born and raised in Kalispell with her parents and two older siblings. She moved to Missoula 25 years ago for her degree in organizational communication and environmental studies. Andrea has dedicated her 22-year career to building sustainable homes as part of responsible community development. And for the past 15 years, she served as executive director of Homeward, expanding it into 14 different communities in the state, leading to experience in policy creation and implementation, while building relationships on all levels of government and in the private sector. Mike Nugent, born and raised in Missoula. He is one of 5 children, and he and his brother, John, are identical twins, so a fun fact there. He holds degrees in political science and public administration. He represents Ward 4 on the City Council here in Missoula. He has served as president of the United Way, serves as vice president of the Fairgrounds Foundation, and is on the YMCA's board of directors. Also, Nugent was appointed by late Missoula Mayor John Angen to the Missoula Housing Authority. His experience encompasses public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including working on larger budgets, along with legislative experience. He is vice president of a statewide brokerage company and co-owner of a small business in Missoula. Well, welcome to our candidates. So next on the agenda, opening remarks from the candidates at 7 minutes maximum. We will start with Mike Nugent.
There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. One of the great things about City Club is the opportunity to engage and sit at tables with people with maybe differing ideas and differing thoughts and have this conversation as a community. And there's no better conversation to be having than this mayor's race. You know, it's an honor, being born and raised here, it's an honor to be part of this conversation. And it's one I don't take lightly. Growing up in Missoula and now working in Missoula, I've definitely been around to see a lot of change. And change brings a lot of positive, but can also bring challenges as well. And there are several key things that I think we need to be talking about in this race. So I want to highlight those before they ding me and say I'm talking too much, which both Andrea and I seem to struggle with at these forums because there's so much to say. But I want to start by talking a little bit about housing. The national average for home ownership is over 60%. The state average in Montana is over 60%. But in Missoula, we are down to 45% home ownership. And that is really concerning because owning a home is often the single way that most Americans build any sort of stability or develop any sort of financial security. It's also one of the best ways to protect yourself from a landlord raising your rent. And we need to work to make sure there are more opportunities for Missoulians to own homes. There are, in the country right now, the age demographic, 18 to 34-year-olds, are more pessimistic about their ability to own a home than at any point in our history. And that same group, 18 to 34-year-olds, are 68% of that group is spending more than what is considered financially responsible on housing. Those are real issues that are impacting us, and this is why it matters so much. The City of Missoula is undertaking a code reform process right now, which is a really small name for a really big project that really matters for Missoulians, and we have to get this right. Code encompasses everything from, does our growth policy match our zoning, but also, what is the process like to get building permits approved? How do subdivisions work? There have been some decisions made at the state legislature that are guiding that a little bit, but that process is ongoing. You know, I was knocking on the doors a couple weeks ago, and I met a woman, and she told me that one of the biggest issues for her was cost of living and housing. And that was because her grandkids had just moved away. And they had moved away because her son, who was born and raised in Missoula, decided that he couldn't get ahead here anymore, that he could not make it work, and he felt like he had to leave. And she actually started crying as she told me the story because she was devastated that these children, these grandkids who had been part of her life, and basically she had been part of theirs since they were born, had to leave. And as somebody who has seen people that I went to school with have to do the same thing, I think we're failing as a community on that front. And it's not just around rentals or subsidized housing, but truly letting people have the opportunity to lay down roots and make positive connections in their community. A couple of the other big issues, public safety. We have major facility needs in both our police and fire departments. The fire department has not added firefighters that ride fire engines and go respond to emergencies since 2008. We need another fire station. That's something that was going to be on the ballot, but at the request of the fire leadership and the unions, we took it off. But that need is still there. The police department has far outgrown their facilities. They're in the basement and some of the first floor of City Hall. So those are issues that I don't think are being talked about enough in this race. And there are things that I want to make sure over the next month we do talk about. I was proud to receive the endorsement from the Missoula Fire Union. They've seen me on council. They've seen that I take the time to understand what their issues are, to meet with their leadership, to meet with the police leadership, first responders, and try and tackle those challenges. And they believe that I'm ready from day one. Another big piece of the public safety is the mobile response team. This was a unit that was stood up by our late mayor and our city council a few years ago. and it is making a real difference in Missoula. It's a unit that includes a paramedic and a social worker, and they go to 911 calls that maybe don't need police and maybe don't need fire, and they work with families and give them an option that isn't just the emergency room or jail. It's helping take pressure off our first responders. It is saving lives in Missoula, and it is something that we need to make sure is funded permanently. But speaking of funding, property taxes. The path we are on in Missoula and throughout Montana is unsustainable. You'll hear often that the system is broken at the state level, and it's true. It absolutely is. There was an interim study before the last session that said the average tax revenue that a local government across the country receives is about 72% of their tax revenue comes from property taxes. In Montana, that number is 99%. So we are way too reliant on property taxes. That's a problem for a couple reasons. One, as elected officials, we need to start being more careful what bonds we put on the ballot, because it may be a good idea, but we just might not be able to afford it right now. And that's something we need to take seriously. The other thing is, we are going to have to get used to having the uncomfortable conversations about priorities. I would like to see a shift to a priority-based budgeting and a commitment to zero-based budgeting throughout the 4-year mayor's term to rebuild departments from the ground up and make sure that what we're doing now makes sense, and look and see if something we implemented 20 years ago still makes sense today. And I think we can get there. I know I'm running quick on time here, so 2 other really big things. Roads and traffic. We need to focus on all of Missoula, especially the areas that are feeling growth, like River Road, End of Scott Street, and Reserve Street. And finally, we need to do all we can to help working families with childcare. My wife and I spent $15,000 on childcare last year. That's just with 2 kids and not going to daycare full time. That is a real issue, and it's one that's hitting working families every day. We need to do all we can to work with our partners, such as the Missoula Child Care Advantage at the United Way, that are trying to make a difference in our community, and I will commit to doing that as mayor.
Job on timing. All right. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Laurel, for your moderation. Really appreciate City Club for this opportunity. Always appreciate City Club's willingness to have civil discourse and conversation as well. Mike, thank you for civil discourse and conversation. And thank you all for your interest in this mayoral race, which we know is really exciting for Missoula. First time we've really had this opportunity for the new candidates to step up and talk about what they believe we can bring to the governance here of Missoula. So my name is Andrea Davis, and some of you might have heard me say this, but if you're wondering how to pronounce my name, it's Andrea Famea, so it's a good way to remember it. And I want to talk a little bit about me. I know many of you here and had the opportunity to connect over the course of this campaign, but some of you I have not. And I'd like to talk a bit about why I'm running, and agree on some of the challenges that Mike talked about. We absolutely both recognize that these are the priorities and considerations that we need to be focused on going forward. And then some of the ways I think that I can help bring solutions forward. So a little bit about me, and you heard earlier, I'm from Montana. This is my home state. I've called Missoula my home for 25 years. My husband, Dennison, and I live in the Franklin to Fort neighborhood, and we love to get out and enjoy all that Montana and Missoula has to offer. And so we get out and enjoy the trails. We ski and bike and hike and boat and camp. Maybe not this season. I've been busy doing some other things, but we'll get back at it again. And enjoying the cultural riches that we have, as well as the connection to the environment. One of the cultural opportunities yesterday, and I hope many of you took advantage of the fact that it was Indigenous Peoples Day, and there were celebrations throughout, but there was a celebration down at Caris Park where there was a powwow and Indigenous Makers Market, and wonderful artists and artisans and dancing and celebration there, and it was just a tremendous opportunity. So I see the challenges and feel the challenges that Mike spoke about and that you're seeing and feeling too. And I would say that as candidates, as the 2 candidates in this general election, we both see what Missoulians are bringing forward in terms of the challenges that we are all facing. Cost of living is a major issue. The issues that were just spoke about in terms of being able to obtain a rental home or a home for purchase are significant issues, as are access to childcare and property taxes. These things are basically making it so people that are learning here and that are retiring here and that are working here aren't able to call Missoula home anymore. We know people are having to move from here or not even set down roots to begin with. And that's not the place any of us have worked hard for over all these years, nor do we want to see our future. And there are things that we can do here locally now, and we have opportunities in front of us, like continuing to work on code reform to make it so the foundation and the environment that the municipal government can allow for the private sector to help build more homes that are affordable. We need to get that right, and we need to step that up. I'm going to say that we have a great process by which we want to make sure that there is deep community engagement, and that's been very good. And yet we need to start seeing some progress and start seeing some things that we can actually put in place as soon as possible so we can start to see some relief. Secondly, on the child care front, this is an issue that the municipal government has an opportunity to work with our private sector and public sector partners. As a government, we can work to help identify places where we can use financing through maybe our tax increment financing in our urban renewal districts to actually buy down the cost of a facility where somebody, similar to what Mike talked about with the Child Care Advantage that we're working on, a great pilot project. We need to be doing more of that, more opportunities in which folks have a way in which they can run child care facilities affordably, so we can make sure that we are not only caring for 0 through 5, but also after school care is really critical. Some of the pilot programs that we currently have underway are something I'm very interested in seeing how we catalyze. The Parks Department is currently, the city and the Parks Department is currently working with Partnership Health Center and others at Lowell School to really develop wraparound services to support families, to enable those families and those parents to keep being able to go to work while their children have the needs taken care of after school. That program is really incredible, and we need to work together to figure out how we're going to scale that up across the entire city and district. Property taxes, as Mike spoke about, this is a systemic issue. We are dealing with a legislative choice from the 1990s, and it has come home to roost really significantly for us. I'm committed to having very transparent conversations with you as we move forward to make very tough budget decisions along with City Council, because we are at a place where we're at a breaking point for people. And we want to make other commitments like I just spoke about, but everything really comes down to resources. So at the end of the day, the credentials that I bring to the table, they're there. But what I really wanted to speak about before I hand the mic back over is that I've been called to service my entire 22-year career. And the reason for that is because I just have a fire in my gut for wanting to help. And when people came to me and asked, would you please consider running for mayor, it was one of the times that people have asked me to step into public service, and I thought deep about that for a long time, about what is that and why does that keep coming in front of me. And I decided that is because of the way in which that I like to relate to people, the way I like to listen to you, and the way I like to hear your ideas and help put that into collective action. And so this to me is something that I take very seriously. It's a deep commitment to this community, and it's a deep honor to be the mayor of Missoula. And I want to extend my appreciation for your consideration of that today, and I'm looking forward to helping us lead Missoula forward. Thank you.
All right, everyone, this is where the infamous table talk comes into play. So here's the beauty of this. That's kind of the gist of why we're here, is the table talk. So some of you are new to this, but how we operate table talk is collectively you can all introduce yourself, come up with a question for your table, and then assign one lucky person to raise their hand and ask the question. We'll have 2 people walking around with microphones, so when we return from this little break, we'll get back at it. So, talk soon. All right, everybody, time to get this party started. Everyone's ready? Okay, so As I said at the beginning of the speech, we're committed to civil discourse. So please, keep your questions respectful. Also, please avoid making long statements. I understand that we have to have context, right? But it doesn't need to be an autobiography. So keep the yeah, Betsy, you're in trouble. So anyways, keep them straightforward. Try and get to your questions as soon as possible. As you can see, looking across the crowd, we've got a lot of people wanting to ask questions. So make sure that you've got your person assigned at the table that's going to ask a question. Everyone's got that dialed in, right? Right. So we have two people with microphones walking the crowd, Eric and Sarah. Sorry. Drew blanks. So anyways, please get right to your question. Please raise your hand if you are the designated speaker, and we will go around. We will start this off with Laurel asking the first question. No pressure.
Whoops. All right, thank you, Dave. All right, time for some questions. Candidates will have exactly 2 minutes to each to answer the questions. If an opponent directly references you, then you will be given a 30-second rebuttal. Our timekeepers here in front, as we touched on that earlier, will give you warnings, and the final red card means your time is up. Also, I will rotate who goes first throughout the debate with the questions. Mike Nugent went first with the opening remarks, so we will start with Andrea. And this is a subject you both touched on, and I can hear some of the tables as you were talking and formulating your questions, talking about it as well. So I'm going to stick with this first question, and we'll dive deeper into the subject, looking for more specifics on this. Right now, Missoula residents are dealing with a growing tax burden from both the city and the state, as you all know, and many are calling for state tax reform, while here at home, some are asking for cuts. If elected mayor, how will you specifically address the growing tax burden locally? What areas would you cut? And with state lawmakers and the governor, how would you specifically work with them to get your message through on tax reform? Andrea.
Okay, thank you, Laurel, for the question. So it's both. We have an issue where we need to be working on this simultaneously at the same time. As mentioned, we have a structural issue that has really teed up, basically carrying forward a balance in the red. And one of the things that's important for us all to recognize that if the city and the county and our local school districts did not raise their budgets any dollars this year, you would still see your property tax increase. And why is that? Because there is a shift from other types of classified taxpayers in our state, largely large corporations and big businesses, that have shifted to residential property taxpayers. It's important to remember this. Now, that's the backdrop from which we are operating. So as a municipality and as the mayor and the city council and staff, we need to be finding efficiencies in areas that we are looking to trim costs. I can't tell you from the position that I'm in today what that would be in, but what I can give you as a commitment is an early and transparent process. January basically starts almost a 6-month budgeting process. That's how I would think of that. That's how I look at it from the work that I have done at Homeward. So in times where I have operated with a need to potentially operate with a lack of consistent revenue at our organization and enough money for our priorities, we basically identify what the essential priorities are, what things we're going to add to our contingent budget, and then we communicate that with our constituency. And I am hopeful that you, as our constituency, will engage in the conversation for potentially some very difficult trade-offs we need to make together.
All right. Thank you. I think that, a two-part question and both could be more than 2 minutes. So quickly, at the state level, I think that it is important for Missoula to advocate for ourselves. I have experience working on legislation from start to finish, finding sponsors, building nonpartisan or bipartisan coalitions, and trying to work together on that. But the reality is that I'm not running for the state legislature, I'm running for mayor. And we need to find solutions that take some of the pressure off of the seniors who are worried about being taxed out of their homes. This is impacting affordability. I firmly believe that that starts in the mayor's office. I've gone through the budget cycle on council, and we do need to start it earlier. It needs to be a little bit more transparent. But I also think that we as a community are going to have to get used to having those uncomfortable conversations where we identify programs and say, this was popular when it was put in. It may still be popular now, but how are we evaluating it? What criteria determine success? And can we still afford it? Or is there somebody else in the community who can do it for us or with us with a little bit of help? I also think that we need to look at how our local government grew during COVID. We received a lot of federal money. We created a lot of new positions, and I actually wasn't on council for a lot of this, but there were a lot of new positions created with ARPA dollars. Some of those, like I mentioned, the mobile response team, need to find their way into our budget. Others, I think we need to evaluate and say, this was supposed to be one-time money. We created more permanent things. Can we afford to do that? But it is not going to work unless you all participate. When I talk about priority-based budgeting, I mean working with the community to determine what people expect as residents of Missoula for their government to provide, and that's priority number one. We work to fund that, and then we kind of start to fill in the gaps, and we work from there. Thank you.
Now we go to a table question.
It was interesting. Okay, it was interesting at our table that an issue that concerned all of us wasn't spoken about by either of you, and that's homelessness, houselessness, urban camping. Some of the people at the table saw it as a public safety issue, and I think this group of people, we all felt we have a very conflicted compassion, and I love that term, that we really want to be the compassionate community that Missoula is, but we're very, very conflicted about our freedom and the public safety of our children traveling throughout the city.
Right.
What is your what is your reaction to that?
Okay. Mike goes first.
Okay,
Yeah.
good question. Thanks.
All right, we'll get this pattern down here. Conflicted compassion, I think, is a good way of putting that out there. It's tough in Missoula right now. It's tough in a lot of places. I think housing is a huge part of that. If people have a safe and secure place to lay their head at night, they have better outcomes. Their children have better outcomes. The other thing that has been frustrating on council is that when we talk about the unhoused in Missoula, we talk about homelessness, people tend to talk about it as one broad group, as if they all have the same experiences and they all arrived at this situation from the same place. And that's just simply not the case. We have families that are homeless because they had a bad break and missed a payment and lost their housing. I ran into a staff member at the Housing Authority a couple of weeks ago, and they were telling me how excited they were that they had just moved a family who was living in their car into some of our new permanently affordable housing that's been developed in Missoula. So I think that we need to focus on housing as a big part of that, but we also need to make sure that when we are utilizing taxpayer resources to fund things, such as opening the Johnson Street shelter, that we need to make sure that we are carrying out the other part of the bargain, which is assuring you all that the parks, the trails, the things that you use are open and available for their intended purposes. We cannot simply add more to our budget and not add an accountability piece as well. And accountability means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I really think that if we could look at the population of the unhoused a little bit more in small groups and try and solve some of the problems on levels where we can make a difference, such as women and children, families, veterans, that it will help us work more closely with people who maybe just aren't as interested in utilizing those resources and bring some accountability to that part of the conversation. And my time's up.
All right. Thank you for that question. It's an excellent question, and conflicted compassion is an excellent way to describe it, because this is something that I often will say it's the head and the heart solutions. We absolutely have a humanitarian crisis and issue that we are working through, and we have a public safety and we have a financial issue that we're managing here. Missoula needs a comprehensive plan to address homelessness. The staff have this on their work plan, and it's a matter of the executive being able to make sure that the staff have the leadership to get that done for our community. We're going to need a number of different solutions, like the Johnson Street facility is an emergency 24-hour short-term facility right now, right? We've committed 1 year of federal dollars that we don't necessarily have in our budget. So we're gonna have to work day one to figure out how is it that we're gonna make sure that we have beds for people so we can have that as one solution going forward. The reality of the need for more permanent affordable homes is really the bedrock to this. And I'm really proud of the work that I've been doing at Homeward all these years, and when I worked at the Missoula Housing Authority, to build homes that are specifically for people that are living with homelessness. Right now, we just leased up 30 permanent supportive homes, which means that people can come as they are, and they are able to receive wraparound services to actually stay stable in that home. But as the city and the reality with our budget, we absolutely need to be taking a look at the kind of initiatives that we're putting forward, being transparent with you, evaluating what's working and what's not working, and then decide what changes we're going to make. Myself personally, because of my experience working on a regional advisory board, I've already been in touch with Bend, Oregon, and Boise, Idaho, and Vancouver, British Columbia, or Vancouver, Washington, Portland, Oregon, talking about what ideas they are putting in place and things that they've tried but they've then had to change. We need to be doing the same in Missoula as much as possible. Thank you.
Next question?
Oh, I'll start. Yeah, thanks, Blaise.
Oh, right. Hi, my name is Susan Ridgway. Could you speak to your experience with the Montana legislature and also tell us how you would use your leadership efforts to engage people outside of Missoula to improve problems in Missoula?
Okay. Thank you, Susan. My experience with the Montana legislature is quite broad and deep. I've had the honor of currently being the chair of the Montana Housing Coalition. It's an organization that I helped establish with for-profit and nonprofit colleagues across the state, businesses, and local governments. And the whole idea behind that housing coalition is to work with the state of Montana to create some form of cohesive housing policy in the state. Montana is one of a handful of states in the nation that does not really put any of its own resources on the table when it comes to these solutions. And so I have worked over the years to develop policy because of the explicit experience that I have as a nonprofit housing developer and the work that I do. I can actually help inform some of the policy work that we have actually helped get across the finish line. In 2019, we passed the Coal Trust Homes Bill. That was where we borrowed $15 million from the Coal Trust and then loaned that to multifamily properties at an affordable interest rate. What that does is it provides affordable capital financing for people to build affordable rental homes or preserve existing homes. The way that I've been successful is by working with people across the aisle. Obviously, this legislative session, we had a supermajority, but the one before that, we were working with people that were of a conservative mindset, and the one before that as well. And so we have to find common values and make sense policies that work for Montana, and it is absolutely achievable, and I intend to do that all day long as the mayor of Missoula, because we cannot keep getting happened to. The mayor has to be present in Helena.
All right, thank you. I think that it's been an interesting conversation about how the legislature interacts with Missoula, and we have learned lessons that sometimes if the idea comes from Missoula, it gets knocked down at the state legislature. So we need to build those relationships with the representative from TUDOT or the person from Columbia Falls, and we need to be doing that year-round, not just in the 90 days of the cycle. I'd like to see us change our lobbying investments that the city currently does and make that more of a strategic communication position that is year-round, where we are working on building those relationships and empowering our staff to build those relationships with lawmakers from around the state so they understand the issues of Missoula. I have a lot of experience working with the legislature. I think that sometimes people don't realize that. In the 2021 session, I worked with a group that identified that there were no meth cleanup standards in residential houses that didn't have meth labs in them in the state of Montana. So I put together a group. We researched what the solutions were. We went and found a sponsor. We got it passed in a bipartisan manner. We got it signed by the governor. This past session, I went and tackled another problem. Montana was one of only a handful of states that didn't require people selling residential property to have written disclosures of what was wrong with their property. That's a huge consumer protection issue and one that I've had a problem with for a long time. So same thing, identified the problem, went and found a solution, went and found a bill sponsor in a bipartisan manner. She and I probably don't agree on a lot. Worked to get that passed, and it was signed by the governor. So I have a track record of identifying problems, working with Republicans and Democrats to get things done. And the only way we're going to find success as Missoula at the legislature is if we find ways to connect with representatives who are not from urban areas, who are not from Missoula, but find ways for them to understand how we're facing these problems.
Hello, my name is Evan. I work for a local nonprofit, Missoula Housing Authority, as well as my spouse and I are local business owners to a retail business. We currently rent a house, and during the rental process, we were asked to disclose all financials and everything about ourselves. And this was with a local rental business or property management business. And through that, they told us the house isn't on the market, but we're accepting all applications. We'll review and take the best applicant. Fortunately, we were chosen, but I felt guilty in this. How will each of you work against discrimination in the rental market to keep housing fair for all?
You know, that's a great question, and thank you for being willing to share your experience with us, because I think that is one that a whole lot of Missoulians are facing, and potentially Missoulians who aren't as educated as you working at the Housing Authority. So it's definitely something that really matters. I think that we need to find ways to build coalitions to do things like universal housing applications so that people aren't paying fees over and over and over again to put the same information down on a piece of paper for landlords to look at. I think that's number one. And our housing office at the city is actually working on a grant that has the opportunity to work on things like that. So I think that's a huge step forward. I think it's education. I think we need to make sure that we are putting it out there what fair housing is, what housing discrimination is, and making sure people know the ways to report it. That's working with our partners at ASUM, making sure that students know that, but that's also working with the food bank, working with people who regularly work with those populations that might be vulnerable to that, to make sure that not only do they know how, but that they have an advocate to help get them through. And there's actually an item in our budget that passed this past month, I guess 2 months ago now, that aims to address that in a way that I think would be beneficial to Missoula, and it's something we can be proud of. But thank you for asking your question.
All right. Yes. Thank you for your question. And I agree with everything Mike said. The work that my organization has done on the universal application, along with other peer organizations in our community, we haven't gotten there yet. It's more complicated than it should be, but it is something that we have a way that we can work with the private sector, in particular property management companies, who may actually find an opportunity there for their staffing to be relieved. There is some unintended consequences with that process, and I would love to talk about that more later. One of the things that comes back to a question we just talked about is the legislature. Income is not a protected class in this state. And so the reality is what you felt was a feeling of discrimination, but technically may not have been, and I don't know your situation in particular. That makes it challenging for a municipality or local government to be able to enforce actual fair housing laws. Education is a real opportunity. We need to make sure that we are continuing to empower our residents with information that will help them advocate and work with other advocates, but also self-advocate. But it isn't a conversation that we can be having with others in our community and other communities, which is, what should we be doing at the state level in order to do things like protection of income? One of the things that my organization, when we build our properties that use public-private financing through the Housing Credit Program, we are required to take Section 8 rental assistance. And we would we do that gladly all day long. The private market is not. And that is something that some states have done in order to help people that are utilizing this very precious resource. 1 in 4 people before the pandemic that were eligible for Section 8 rental assistance actually were able to get that. We know that number is higher now. You work for the Housing Authority, you know better than I do. And thank you for your question.
Thank you. My name is Bob Galliani. We mentioned the people living in tents and so forth, but drugs never came up. I was talking to 3 uniformed Missoula police officers, and I said, what do you spend most of your time on? And they said, people living in tents and people essentially living on the sidewalks in downtown Missoula. And I said, if you put a magnifying glass on that, what percentage are hardcore drug addicts, what percentage are mental health issues, and what percentage are just good people down on their luck? And they said 90% drugs, 5% mental issues because of drugs, and 5% people down on their luck. Some people disagree with that. People at my own table disagree with those numbers. My son works for the Parks Department, City of Missoula. He said they spend a third of their time dealing with people living in tents in the park. And when they get them to move so that they can trim trees and mow the lawn and so forth, they then clean up. And he said 100% of the time there's needles and it's drugs, drugs, drugs. So my question is, will you not make the mistake that San Francisco and Seattle and Portland made of addressing all of this as unhoused? Will you differentiate from drug addicts who need rehab to people down on their luck who need job placement, job training, and affordable housing? But will you acknowledge that it's 2 different problems that need 2 different solutions?
Thank you for your question. I will absolutely acknowledge that there are different circumstances for people that are living houseless. My staff yesterday, we did a river cleanup as part of our in day, we call it, for Indigenous Peoples Day, and we also have practice at cleaning up needles because we work at the corner of Russell and Broadway, so I'm all too familiar with the circumstances that you're talking about, in addition to speaking with other people and our public service departments. One of the things that we are unfortunately facing in our community is we are dealing with decades of underfunding of mental and behavioral health care, as well as substance abuse dollars. Same thing at the state level. When they decreased our funding in 2017, they have never gotten our funding back up to those levels. We were lucky in this legislative session to actually get $300 million to behavioral health care, which will help us connect folks that are living unsheltered and using hard drugs so we can actually connect people to services and substance abuse. That money is not to our community yet, right? So we need to keep putting the pressure on the administration and the commission that they've established to make sure that our communities get this. We will not make the same choice that Portland made, for example, or Seattle. One of the things that they did, and there were a number of circumstances that are different than Missoula, but having laid off nearly a third of their police force, that is not something that we are going to do here. The Missoula police force, through our crisis intervention team and the mobile support team, actually are cutting edge in this state when it comes to addressing behavioral health care. We need to talk seriously about using our resources to have a sanctioned camp spot in our community where we can actually provide some humanitarian care and sanctity, but protection and predictability for the rest of our community. And so when it comes down to bathrooms, garbage, somewhere that needles can be put, and security, we actually can, and service providers can find those folks living on site. That's what we need to be able to do.
All right, thank you, great question. To lead off, no, we will not do what San Francisco and Portland have done, and I think that any community facing this issue has to learn lessons from those communities that have kind of faced some of this earlier. You talk about a subsection, and I think that my point earlier about not looking at the unhoused as one giant population, but several small ones definitely makes sense. And the group you talk about, the people that we kind of maybe see on the streets downtown, are more reflective of some of the concerns you state. And I know that our police officers share a lot of those. I'm committed to working with our first responders and with our police officers on identifying what the issues are and how we can actually help. And that's also important for us to to build a relationship with our municipal court judges to understand what pressures they're seeing as well, and how things can actually be enforced in a way that doesn't just throw people in jail, because it actually costs more money to put somebody in jail than it does to do almost any other type of service. But the city isn't able to be the mental health provider. The city isn't able to be the substance abuse counselor. So we need to work with our partners to identify that. The other thing I'd like to see us do, and this is a little bit out of the box for maybe Missoula, I'd actually like to see us assign a handful of police officers to the unhoused route, because I think that we can build better relationships and try and cut off some of these problems before they become major issues that don't involve writing a ticket, that don't involve sanctioning someone, but involve, if I know you, I'm more likely to be able to help you. And every time I've ridden along with our police officers, I've been amazed at how well they actually know the unhoused community. And I think that we can do better on that front, and I think that it will help us all work together to solve this problem. I beat you on that card, too.
Good job.
Hello, my name is Anthony Swartz. What is your basic philosophy on the local government in solving issues like childcare shortage, homelessness, and meaning what do you believe in expanding city services, specters, or non-government and private sector groups? Do you believe in that work already? I also want to point out that addiction is a coping mechanism, so homelessness, they're doing whatever they can to get through. So, bless you.
Thanks for the comment at the end. I love your haircut too, by the way. There are times when government is part of the solution, and there are times when government is the convener of the people that will actually be the solution. And local government, we are struggling to fund our basic services right now. We have already a $4 million deficit going into next year of ARPA money and money that came from the redevelopment agency just to meet baseline. That doesn't include cost of living or anything like that. So we aren't going to be a child care provider, but what we can do is find the people who have the creative solutions and figure out how we can help. And sometimes that's not monetary. That's just being a cheerleader. That's being a grant sponsor. That's being the facilitator of getting the right people to help them build facilities and be at the table together. That's finding the proper state program or national program. So I don't think that Missoula wants to see us grow government and be the solution for everything. There are times where it absolutely makes sense. I don't think anybody in the private sector is ever going to want to handle your sewage getting to a sewage plant. So that is a very good government function. Childcare, it's across the board. We see it in parks right now. Parks is a very large childcare provider in this city through their programs. But then we have great partners like the YMCA, which is the largest childcare provider in the state of Montana. And they're right now undergoing a capital campaign to double their childcare capacity. So they are already the largest childcare provider in the state, and they want to double it. We as a city should be finding all the ways we can to help them. They're not in a TIF district, so we can't use MRA money, but can we waive impact fees? Can we do other things to help them invest in this community? And I think that's where we start.
Okay. The way I'd like to answer your question is that the city is able to be a partner on so many fronts. And in a lot of ways, we are a partner because we are a convener. The mayor has an opportunity to be a huge advocate and an influencer. We are not able to write a check for all of the needs that we have in our community. We started out this conversation saying that we're going to have to make some hard decisions moving forward. But the way in which we can collaborate, we use this terminology, these public-private partnerships, but really we need to have the tools that we have as a local government, a municipal government, and figure out how it is that we leverage the ability and the resources and the ingenuity of the private sector is really how we're going to tackle so many of these issues. We shared some ideas with you about how we would be able to enhance childcare. We can do the same around education. The city and the mayor doesn't control our school districts, But we have the opportunity to influence the way in which our neighborhoods are safer, the way our teachers are respected, that we have the opportunity to target maybe a community land trust homeownership opportunity for people working in our school districts so we can make sure those people are living and working in our community. There are specific things that we can go after, that we need to do. And quite frankly, some of the issues that we've talked about, especially in terms of the really deep and challenging issues around people living homeless and dealing with substance abuse challenges, we need to be a #1 advocate at the federal and the state level, because they need to hear from people on the ground what we're hearing from all of our constituents and the challenges we're facing and what we expect from our federal delegation and state delegation.
Hi, my name is Tanya, and I just wanted to ask, you both sound very similar. What is the one thing that you think makes you different than your opponent?
Thank you, Tanya. We were laughing because we get this question a lot. And I would say that the one thing that makes me different than my opponent is that I have such broad and deep experience with some of the very issues that you're talking about today. My husband and I have also owned small businesses, but I have been the executive director of a very robust statewide organization for 15 years. And being in an executive position in which I am responsible for the strategic direction of that organization, the financial wherewithal and the business planning of that organization to address significant community needs, and both working on the policy level as well as getting those projects built successfully, that level of expertise, those relationships both locally and statewide with the business sector as well as the public sector, and then the positive leadership that I have maintained to build that organization into what it is today. We are an employer of choice, and I am really proud of that. I have folks that are wanting to come to work for Homeward as an organization from other well-respected places in this community, and I am proud of that. And I want to do that for the city, and I do think that that is what stands me apart. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question. I think that my experience is more broad. I've been a public sector employee. I currently serve on the city council. I own a small business right now, and I operate a statewide company. I have been on the Missoula Housing Authority. I have seen housing from the subsidized angle, but I've also worked with people who are trying to build housing for people who will never qualify for a subsidy. I've seen the struggle to work with the legislature to try and find solutions that will actually make a difference for people. And I think it's a fair question. I think that Missoula's got a lot of good interests, and we do have a lot of similarities, and we joke about that because we spend a lot of time on stages together lately. And so I say that with complete respect, but I have run businesses where we have to cut employees. I have dealt with budget shortages in the nonprofit world and in the private sector world. I've invested my own blood, sweat, and tears in trying to make something successful. And I've shared some of those lived experiences with people in Missoula who are struggling to just make ends meet, who understand dropping your kids off at daycare and coaching youth sports, or trying to get Hannah to ballet and James to baseball. We see those things in us and so many of our friends. And I think that is just something that the Missoulians are waiting for. Someone that they relate to, that they say, hey, this person understands what I'm going through. And I think I bring that to this race, but I'm honored to be a part of it, and I have great respect for Andrea and her nonprofit that we are donors to, and still are, I'd like to point out. Oh, it's going to be me.
Hi, my name is Sam Schmidt. Thank you for being here today. As a soccer mom, I want to train to Fort Missoula, but that's another thing. I would love to hear one or two very specific examples that you foresee doing to work with the county in addressing the housing issue.
Absolutely. I can point to a few that I've already done. The county was ahead of the city on doing their massive rezone and trying to make the growth plan match the zoning, and I was part of that conversation. But I think the bigger thing on examples of work at the county is there are times where you've heard us talk about how we need to go be the advocate for Missoula at the state level and at the national level. And if the city and the county are partners in that front, we can be more successful. Because if you've got the county commissioners saying one thing to the delegation, and if you have the city saying another, it really hurts our chances. But the other thing I think is that when we talk about attracting employers who will pay good salaries, when we talk about inviting people to come help us face some of our biggest challenges on the housing front, or to meet some of Missoula's needs that we want, like a community center or a the riverfront triangle that maybe someday gets off the ground, it will take the ability to build those coalitions. And if the city and the county aren't on the same page, we'll struggle. You can look at times in our history where we've gone back and forth, but I also think that the county has a very specific role. They represent all of Missoula County, but have to keep county interests in mind. The city is just the city of Missoula, and I think that they are two very unique personalities. So I don't think we need to be in lockstep on everything, and there are times where the city needs to be the leader. But you could point to things like Mountain Line Bus, or the open space bonds, or one of a huge number of things that make Missoula the place that we all love to be, as initiatives to continue, as initiatives to work together. The other thing we can do is, if the city's doing something well, help the county get there. Can they change the way they set up their government so that they can work more closely with the federal government to have a housing authority that can reach into the county? Oh, lost, the time's up.
Thank you. Thank you for that specific question. First of all, you know that bus rapid transit is planned for Brook Street, so you might get your request, because please take a look at the Midtown Master Plan, as we are really looking to reshape that part of our community from more of a suburban outlay to more of an opportunity for more homes, more retail, and the first bus rapid transit in the state of Montana. So Mountain Line's poised to do that, and it's exciting. A couple of the things that I believe the city and the county can work on specifically: the county is currently doing work around the Y of northwest of us, and we, as the city, will need to have a conversation, and a good conversation, around extension of sewer and public utilities and annexation. Annexation is always a contentious conversation, and also one of a lot of debate. We know that growth does not pay for itself, and at the same time, we know that we need to be able to facilitate necessary growth. We want our public utilities to be actually available for expanded home opportunities. The Y is one of those areas. Mike spoke to the county redoing their land use map and then their correlated zoning. And I've been talking with a lot of folks in the community that build homes and are part of our business community. And I think there's some lessons that we can take away from the county as we update Missoula's development code. There are some things that I think we want to be careful of as we put our new development code in place. We have a tendency to overcode ourselves to the point where we are literally stymied, and we have created so much internal bureaucracy we can't deliver on the service you expect. And that will have a direct correlation to the ability to build more homes that are affordable. And that's something that I think we can work with the county on to actually get some good ideas there.
Hello, Larry Chase. A bit earlier to an answer, Andrea, you said something about an executive to get it done. You're both running for what is going to be a short 2-year term as opposed to a longer 4-year term. So our question from our table is, how would you approach that short term to accomplish all of these things that you say you want to see happen in Missoula?
That is an excellent question. Thank you. So you're exactly right. One of the main issues that are right in front of us are the questions that we were asked earlier. We have an ever-growing urban homelessness challenge, and we have a short-term funding plan for the Johnson Street facility. We have 1 year of funding for that. And we have a neighborhood who has expressed a lot of concern about the way in which that shelter has had impact to immediate neighbors in the neighborhood in general. So we're going to have to work very quickly to figure out what our solution is going to be. As many in this room know, we are under a court ruling that does require us to, in order to have a comprehensive plan, in order to say to somebody, you can't sleep here, but you can sleep here, we actually have to have a number of shelter beds for the folks that are living unhoused in our community. We're going to need to figure that out first and foremost, and how are we going to fund that? I actually have a meeting on Thursday morning with somebody that represents a larger faith-based consortium here, because going back to the question earlier about how are we going to get all this done, local government's not going to get it done by itself. So that's one of the main areas of focus. The other is we are going to have to tee up, along with our allies across the state, both at local government and in the business sector, how we are going to have a serious conversation around property tax reform. And we need to be ready for the 25 session. So the mayor needs to get started with our lobbying and with our allies immediately. Secondly, we need to be addressing the budget issues. So our budget will be passed this summer, but we need to be working on the challenges that you expressed from the beginning. And one of those is how are we going to continue to fund the current commitments that we have and our priorities with our, without having to raise taxes, hopefully yet again. Those are the three main areas that I would see. If we could tackle that seriously in these next 2 years, we'd be winning.
Thanks. I believe the question actually asked for how. How are we going to kind of hit the ground running? I've been on council for the last year and a half. I've had a front row seat to see what some of our challenges are and what a lot of our opportunities are. Missoula is a tremendous community. We've had strong leadership for a long time. But what Missoula doesn't need is a leader who's afraid of a short term and not hitting the ground running. And whether I'm elected mayor or not, there are challenges that I am working on, that I've been working on in my position, such as, we do not have a urban camping policy that makes any sense. We need to fix that. We don't have a policy that addresses RVs, long-term camping in places, and what's safe for them and what's safe for the community. We need to address that. I'm the candidate that is ready on day one because of that broad-based experience. I've gone through the budgeting cycles. I know how it works. I know what our opportunities are. And I think that's why you've seen groups such as the fire union that I mentioned earlier recognize that I'm the candidate that can hit the ground running. But I think that my promise to all of you, and I'm going to watch it because I'm not going to fall for the run out of time again, is we won't govern afraid. I am not running to be mayor for a long time. I am running to be mayor right now because I think there are challenges in Missoula that need to be met. I have no political ambitions beyond this. So I just think that right now we need leadership. We need it in the worst way because the issues we're facing are tough. There are no easy solutions, but the last thing we can do is just tread water for 2 years until we run again and have a 4-year term. We need to hit the ground running from day one, and I am ready to do that.
Yes, my name is George Curran. Thank you both for being here. The table's question, what will you do as mayor that falls within your power to address housing affordability and workforce housing needs? We recognize you've touched on that in many ways already, and so I think our table is saying, please be as specific as you can, again, under your authority as mayor, and most impactful, so the priority, the one thing we'll know that you want to do and going to accomplish as mayor to impact that affordability of housing, particularly, again, for the workforce. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think we'd both take 20 minutes and answer this question because it's really thorough, but we'll try and put it in 2 minutes. We have to be willing to identify what our actual problems are, acknowledge them, and change them. Missoula did a growth policy about 5 years ago, but we have not updated the zoning, which means if you come into town and you want to build housing where we have said in our growth policy, hey, build housing, you have to come to city council and ask permission and spend $30,000 or $40,000 to get it rezoned to do it. So from day one, we're going to tackle things like that. I'm going to put together a mayor's task force on housing that identifies the bottlenecks. that sits down with the people who are actually doing it, not just the nonprofit world, but the for-profit world as well, and say, what are the bottlenecks? What is causing trouble? We can build on the work that our partners like MEP have already done in this area, take that, put it together and say, okay, these are the things that need to change. What are state statutes? What are rules that we have locally? And what are things that are just customs that we've done that have prevented housing being built? Because like I mentioned earlier, Missoula is down to a 45% home ownership rate. We are failing our community on that front. Our policies have not been working. And anybody who is standing in the way of home ownership opportunities, I don't think they're rowing in the right direction. So being willing to have that conversation, being willing to identify those problems, get the right people in the room, and not be afraid of how that works out is what I'm going to tackle from day one.
Great, thank you. That's exactly right. Bringing people from all specters to the table in order to listen to the ideas, suggestions, and then making decisions from there is exactly what needs to happen. So you spoke to the MEP. Missoula Economic Partnership did do a process by which resembled folks that are in the for-profit, nonprofit sector that are in the building trades to identify areas that we could improve locally. One of those is that we are evaluating our development code, auditing our permitting process. I don't have my hands on that information right now, and I cannot wait, because I cannot wait to see what it is that we can trim out and what we can't. There are things that we need to absolutely maintain in terms of public health and safety, building code, and of course our current adherence to our zoning code, but we are going to update that in a way that allows us to deliver it in a more predictable format. That will help with workforce and affordable homes. The city can also fund its Affordable Housing Trust Fund at greater rates, which it will after it sells some of the properties currently earmarked for that. The Sleepy Inn at the corner of West Broadway and Russell is a property that is identified to fund a large capital infusement into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Those dollars can be used both as grants and a revolving loan fund to be able to incentivize the public-private partnerships we're talking about, both rental and homeownership opportunities. On workforce development, this is something that the city, by way of doing our zoning code, but then also by finding other opportunities I spoke to earlier. So the way in which that we can there's a legislative bill that we got passed this session, which is really complicated, but it will allow for some down payment assistance. The city currently funds Missoula Economic Partnership, as does the county, to help basically figure out how it can be one of the organizations to bring those dollars into our region. And it's substantial. It's up to 1/3 of the home ownership price.
Hi, guys. Todd Rare, Northwestern Energy. We talked a lot about taxes, and I know, Mike, you had mentioned that 99% of the revenue is derived from property taxes. Well, we've got high property taxes here in Montana, but we're not the highest. Obviously, Seattle, Portland, I mean, there's a lot of high taxes over there as well. But our question was this, two-part. One was on workforce. What industry could you bring to this town? I mean, Boise, you brought up a little while ago, Bozeman as well, really concentrated on tech. I mean, it's not just about having more jobs, it's about having higher paying jobs. So what type of specific industry would you guys advocate bringing here? Because quite frankly, I don't know what our industry is anymore. The other thing is if we were to lower that from 99% to, what was it, 70%, Mike? How do you close that gap? Because obviously we've got budgetary problems and we got to raise the money somehow. So specifically, how would you do that?
Yeah, in 2 minutes, thank you. So the first question is, what kind of industry would I like to see grow here in Missoula? And I'm going to go back to Missoula Economic Partnership. I just talked about this, which is basically the economic development arm of our local and city, but it's a separate membership organization. We are working on sector-wide expansion of different kinds of economic diversity. And when you look at that way that we have diversified Missoula's economy compared to where we were in 2012, it's actually pretty significant. One of our opportunities right now in front of us is to take advantage of the gift that the federal government has given us in the form of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There is money right now to basically facilitate sector-wide development of green energy jobs. We need to be all over that opportunity because it tackles many things at once. It's good paying jobs, it's manufacturing jobs, and we are addressing what is absolutely has to happen, which is the reduction of fossil fuels. We just experienced the hottest month on record in the hottest year on record. When are we going to do something about it? Let's tie those two things together. Secondly, the question about what is the diversity of revenue for a local government, and that's really a question all of us need to have. We often hear and people ask, would you support a tourist tax? Would you? That is a form of a sales tax. And there is, we're one of 5 states that do not have a sales tax in place. We need to ask ourselves, is this the time for us to put together a meaningful way that we can actually test? I would call it a travel tax, because quite frankly, my organization would pay that too. We travel all over this state, renting hotel rooms and renting cars in order to do the work we do. That doesn't mean I'm opposed to it, and I want to make sure that the folks that are involved in that sector are actually at the table. I just spoke with the Destination Missoula consultant. One of the things that we don't know about some of our work is because we don't have sales tax, we don't have the data to prove it.
All right, I'll try and remember both parts to your question here. The first one was about jobs and industry, and honestly, I think the biggest thing we can do without attracting anybody to town is improving trades education in this community. I think that I've spent a lot of time talking with the folks at Missoula College. I've talked to a lot of the union leaders in Missoula, and I've talked to some people in our high schools, and I believe that one of the many reasons that we are seeing housing prices in Missoula climbing so much is we have a shortage of skilled labor, and we can help, because that is a way for people who are from Missoula who maybe are deciding not to go to college to get good jobs that will afford them the ability to live here. So while I will always support my friends at MEP and believe in attracting industry, I want to invest in the trades in Missoula in a way that we haven't done before. Because if somebody can graduate high school with a certification in welding, or if they can finish high school and do a 2-year or less program and be on the path to being a journeyman carpenter or things like that, that's going to have positive outcomes in a lot of different ways in Missoula. So I would like to focus inward and try and improve people's outcomes in Missoula first. Second part of your question was on taxes, and the reality is that the city of Missoula is not going to change the revenue structure for the state. That is a statewide issue or maybe a ballot initiative issue. And the conversation around tourist tax and things like that is one worth having, because there were 3 million tourists in Missoula last year. And we do very little to capture that economic impact on Missoula. They pay a bed tax, but that goes to the state. Part of it comes back to advocate for tourism, but then the rest of it goes into the general fund of the state of Montana. It doesn't even come back to the communities that are feeling that pinch. So there are small things we can do at the state legislature which seem like completely reasonable, especially when you've got a $2 billion surplus. And my time's up.
Good job. We'll get there. Stand up, state your name really clearly, and then
Okay. Okay. Hi, I'm Justina McDermott. I work with WGM Group, and our table, correct me if I'm wrong with these numbers and stuff, but it appears that both of you are small business owners. You mentioned it earlier. It appears that Mike's family may own Paradise Falls, and Andrea and some sort of entity may own several rentals. And we were just wondering, how did you both come to own your businesses, and how will you bring your business relationships to the mayor's office?
That's a good question. I own a small business with my wife and her family, and it is Paradise Falls. It's been established for much longer than I've been a part of my wife's family. But my wife has worked there and run it with her father for the last 15 years. And we bought out her aunt, 6 years ago. We mortgaged our house. We pulled money from basically everywhere we could get it to invest in that, so that she and her dad could do that together. And then COVID hit, and I thought, oh my God, what did we do? But that's what being a small business owner is like. You have ups and downs. You're working very hard to try and make a difference, to do something that people like, but also to give people jobs. Everybody who's a full-time employee at our restaurant has health insurance. That's not the case for every service industry. So I think that you take those experiences of owning a small business, of understanding what people are going through, but also seeing the impacts of high costs of living on them, and you apply that to the conversations we're having. Because I think sometimes when people aren't involved in businesses, big or small, they tend to dismiss some of the challenges that people face trying to keep the doors open every day. And we're seeing in Missoula right now, with several restaurants closing, that being in the service industry is hard. And that perspective is important, because we cannot dismiss people simply because we haven't lived their experiences. And I think that one of the things that Missoula has a real opportunity to improve on is engaging people who don't normally engage in the public process. I have said it before on council, I think that there's a bubble around city government, and then you go out and you have conversations with people, and the things that they talk about don't touch at all what we talk about on council. So I think that we bring that perspective to the table to make a difference.
Good job. Got it right down to the end. All right. Thank you for that question. My husband and I have been involved in private enterprise. He started Grant Creek Deli more than 20 years ago. Some of you might remember that place here in Missoula. No longer is the owner there. And then we opened a small backcountry property that was a recreation property in Granite County. So my husband, I've always, I'm the careerist. I mentioned I've been involved in the housing sector for 22 years. And being the careerist and that stability, the one that had health insurance, enabled my entrepreneurial husband to be able to do some of these things. We built that property from the ground up. I know exactly what it feels like to empty your savings account, mortgage your house and your retirement fund on something that you want and you believe in so much. I would say that, for that project, we were a little ahead of ourselves. Montana wasn't quite discovered the way it is now. Fortunately, we were able to sell that, kind of a bittersweet situation. And we do own rentals. And my husband has rental properties here, Sunflower Homes LLC, and does a heck of a job. We manage and he does all the maintenance and the management himself. And that is how we're able to keep our rents on average 20% lower than the market. That's actually more affordable than some of the affordable programs that are out there. And that's because he's the one that's schlepping his lawnmower, he's schlepping his rakes, he's working on Saturday and Sunday to make that happen. That's the experience that I would take into the mayor's office, because we need to make sure that we are a community that is business friendly. I have heard over the years, and from my friends that are currently in free enterprise and in private business, the unfriendly environment sometimes that is the reality of local government. We need to turn that around. Local business is what makes this community tick. I mean, if we don't have local businesses, this community doesn't thrive, and that's the experience I'd bring.
Okay, so as you would both be new to this position, who would you consider your experts in different areas as you're evaluating budget and so on?
Okay, thank you. So who would I look to as an expert in evaluating budgets? One of the folks that I have been so appreciative of standing beside me in this candidacy is former Mayor Cadis. He not only was the mayor of Missoula, but he was the Department of Revenue Director. And when we talk about property taxes, and when we talk about some of the difficult decisions that you need to make at the local level, this is somebody that has lived it on all those levels, at the state and the municipal level. That is somebody that I absolutely have already worked with in dissecting the FY22 budget and looking in more carefully at the FY24 budget. And so that certainly at the municipal level. Also, I continue to rely on the experience that I have as an executive of a housing organization that manages its own 501c3 budget, and then all of the ancillary project budgets that we have. I mean, at this point, my organization has $100 million in different development status. So we've got a project in Kalispell, Great Falls, Missoula, and Lewistown. That is not a municipal budget, I understand, but the complexity of managing multi-million-dollar budgets and how they actually fit together into one organizational budget is relevant experience to the city of Missoula. And then 1/2 minute left. Okay. Lastly, that I would say, in addition to Mayor Kadis, I do have Mayor Kemmis's support and endorsement, and that is somebody who has managed not only city budgets but also been a legislator, and those are folks that I would look to for that municipal experience. But I also would look to the expert staff that we have in the city government. We have expert, dedicated staff that are running the show here, that are doing a great job, and I would lean on their expertise.
All right, thank you. The big thing about leading on anything is getting the right people on the bus, surrounding yourself with people smarter than you, and letting them do their jobs. If we need to identify someone who would serve as a mentor, I'm blessed to have the support of Janet Stevens-Donahue. She's a former county commissioner. She was the chief administrative officer, I believe, during the Kadis administration, and was part of the first all-female county commissioner board in the nation's history. And her and I have talked a lot about what works in community budgeting and what doesn't work in community budgeting. So I have that in my background. I also have done it. I have been on city council for the last 2 budget sessions. I've seen what works and what doesn't work. I've seen how we need to improve our process, bring it forward, make it more transparent so it starts earlier, so we're having the conversations about what our priorities are before we're down to the deadline of when the tax bills have to go out. So I think that building that team and relying on the great staff that we have now, including our budget director and our chief administrative officer, for the historical knowledge of what got us to this current place, can get us to a place where I think we can make a real difference for Missoula. Was there a second half of that question? No? All right. There we go. I'm way before your time card.
I think we still have time for a couple more questions, or we're getting close.
Film and do this. You're all on social media, by the way. Just so you know. Darren Byer, Clearwater Systems. We treat water, not banking, not building, and not property. I also part of a small business owner, Mike, Art Cake, Montana. You got to come grab cupcakes, remember? Second best wedding cake in Missoula. At the end of your term, getting there, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, Andrea and I were at a business networking meeting last week, and he was there, and I learned that he has a cupcake shop. So, I'm always interested in anything cupcake. What I want to be remembered is somebody who put aside personal interests to do what is right for the community at a time when we really need leadership. I've talked a lot today about all the different things that are contributing to the cost of living and this kind of crisis point we're at in Missoula, where we're somewhat in risk of losing our identity. And whether those tough decisions lead me to be a short-term mayor or I run again and I get reelected, that really doesn't matter to me. What I want people to say is he didn't do anything for political reasons. He did it because he felt in his heart that it was the right thing to do. And I've tried to let that guide me through my whole life. Public service, serving as president of the United Way, serving on the Housing Authority, being on city council. The closer you get to service, such as council or the mayor, the harder decisions get, because it isn't just yes or no. You can't just say, oh, don't camp here, and people stop camping there. You've got to have policies. You've got to have ways to actually enact change and to make a difference. And if at the end of my term, people look back and say he wasn't afraid of tackling the tough decisions, he wasn't afraid of bringing the tough conversations out front for all of us to have, which, for better or worse, my colleagues on council can tell you I probably have a habit of doing that. That's the legacy I want to have. I am from Missoula, born and raised here, and I intend to be here my whole life. I do not want to be mayor forever, which means I want Missoula to be a better place when I'm done than when I started. And I think that's the basic goal and answer to your question.
I would like for you to remember at the end of the 2-year term that that there was notable that we made some progress on the items that we talked about today. That we're not going to solve these things. And one of the things that I would also like for you to take away is that we might not agree on the decision, but you'll always know why I make it. I'll always be transparent about that. And one of the goals that I have for the city is improved communication with you, with our constituents. Because we talked about a host of very complex and challenging issues, and we need a greater understanding amongst all of us of the things that work, that don't work, and what some options are in front of us. And I would like for my two-year term, and at the end of that, for people to say, I understood what the intention was going in, and I see the progress that we made. And I might not have always agreed with her, but at least she always told me the truth.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Okay, Heather Harp of Habitat for Humanity. We've talked a lot about housing today, but I think it's also really important for our community to understand the connection between housing and transportation and how those are married together so that we can make more informed decisions as we move forward, whether from an expenditure perspective or from a revenue perspective. So if you could briefly just kind of talk about how you would deal with both of those major components, which are both the largest contributors to climate change, how we will do better.
Am I next? I think I'm okay. Thank you, Heather, for that question. I'm glad you asked it because it's two areas that I'm so passionate about. Housing and transportation go hand in hand, and it is something that we have recognized in our community as an opportunity for us to plan better. So through this growth policy update and the development codes that we're talking about, my vision for that is that we are able to create the framework that we can build communities that enable us to have homes that are accessible to bike, transit, walking, and of course, cars. We're always going to have cars in our life. But when we can reduce the cost of transportation, we dramatically reduce our cost of living. My 11 years on Mountain Line Board has been dedicated just to that thing. And the reason I've served on that board for so long is because transportation and housing go hand in hand together. And how we make our land use decisions totally impact our ability to be successful or not. The reason that we as voters have voted in Mountain Line to be zero fare is because we recognize the opportunity for there to be a significant impact and people just get on the bus and they go. And when we talk about the Midtown Master Plan and bus rapid transit, that is a significant change by which people truly could live with one vehicle or no vehicles and actually have a lifestyle in Missoula and outside of Missoula. We need to always recognize that Missoula, people need to get out, right? We're in Montana. And, but once we make these decisions that we really help people make a choice. We're not trying to cram things down people's throats as much as how do we give people a choice? And I was talking earlier with somebody, and one of the ways, our built environment totally impacts our behavior. And no insult to Reserve Street or businesses or people that live out there, but I do like to bike to work, not always, I bike around town, but often if I have to run an errand out there, I definitely get in my vehicle because of a public safety concern, a personal safety concern. When we counsel folks at Homeward, we're first-time homebuyer counselors and educators, we actually sit down and we show you what the calculus is on a location of a home that you're purchasing so we can show what your transportation costs will be in addition to your mortgage. We've talked for a long time about how amazing that would be if the mortgage industry could actually take that on as a way to underwrite you, because then you truly would be able to evaluate your affordability. But that is something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward on our larger municipal codes and such.
I think this is a great question, and it's a conversation that is had over and over again with lots of strong opinions around town. To me, this hits on part of the reason our code reform process is so important right now. Because like I mentioned, the community passed a growth policy several years ago. That growth policy said focus inward. The idea is to prevent sprawl, encourage building where we already have infrastructure. those all fit hand in hand with making it easier for people to get from point A to point B, to take advantage of the public transit we already have. And yet we haven't updated the zoning maps to do it. So we say as a community we want to do this, but then as leaders, there hasn't been the courage to tackle it in a way that makes sense. And I know that it's not that simple because code reform has been in the process, but we need to keep that commitment. The other thing is when we do see large, dense areas being developed, such as the significant number of apartments that have gone in out Mullen Road, we need to make sure that there's bus service out there to meet the needs of the community where they're at. And sometimes that involves evaluating how the buses are used and maybe encouraging shifts without putting on new routes, but saying, hey, this has gone a little bit. Every time the Mountain Line changes bus stops, though, it's controversial, and the city has nothing to do with it, though we hear about it. And so I think that commitment to making sure that we're acknowledging all the different ways people like to get around town, recognizing that this is Montana and a lot of people will continue to have cars and that will be part of the conversation, but also making sure that when given the opportunity, we're creating greenways and we're doing things to encourage and make easier for alternative routes of transportation, all can be achieved. And they can be achieved with things the city of Missoula is already doing. We have so many great things going around climate, around transportation, around encouraging people to consider different options, Missoula Motion, things like that. And I would only work to enhance that. So thanks for the question.
Closing statements next. Okay, so we'll wrap up the debate with closing statements. 2 minutes each. Let's go ahead and start with Mike.
All right. I started by saying thank you for being here, and I'm going to end by saying thank you for being here. This was a great city club, like they always are. So thanks to everybody who takes the effort to put those together. I'm going to take a moment of personal preference. Since I did grow up here, I want to thank my parents for being here. My mother was a early childhood educator for 44 years, speech pathologist with MCPS, and my dad did something with the city. But I just appreciate being able to share my life with them. And that story that I talked about with the grandmother whose grandkids were in the same town, I'm so lucky to have that. So I want to thank you both very much for being here and giving me the foundation of which to do this. I really think that Missoula has had a great conversation around this race. We have another month, and I think we have 35 more forums, Andrea. So, we're ready for that. But I really do believe that when you sit down, if we strip out names and identities and all of that and just put biographies on the table, I bring a diverse background, a set of experiences that touches the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit world, that has seen housing from not just subsidized, but from market rate, has touched on those needs that people who will never qualify for a subsidy, but still need a place to live, are struggling every day. We've seen the challenges that working families in Missoula are facing, and I am ready to tackle those head on. So I would encourage people to put off what you've heard. There's a lot of stuff that's floated around that I think is intentionally misleading. I evaluate us based on our biographies. Put them side by side and say who is ready to become mayor on day one. Because this position starts really quickly after the election. It's not January, it's in November.
Yeah, I know, thank you. Sure does. Indeed. Mike, thank you. Laurel, thank you. City Club and everybody, thank you for being here. Great questions. We got through more than we anticipated, which is really exciting. I believe that you see two candidates up here that have a lot of shared priorities, understanding the challenges that Missoula is facing, that you're facing, and opportunities that we have in front of us. And what I wanted to relay to you is that certainly I have the capabilities. Certainly I have the experience. That's something that both through the private sector and public sector experience that I've had. A nonprofit is a private sector entity, but has a different public sector responsibility than does private business. I would say that based on the expertise that I bring to the table through the deep work I've had, not only developing policy and implementing that to get homes built, but also through the relationships I've built here locally and statewide. Yes, those are all things that are going to be very beneficial for the mayor's office. But I want to say that what I'm really excited about in terms of this opportunity is a way to give a spark and really help folks engage with local government again. I really feel that the last 4 years have been challenging for us in so many different ways, and we have some of the most intense and complex issues yet in front of us. I want to help influence, and I want to help incentivize the next generation to do exactly what we're doing here on stage, to realize that we have the most impact right here and not be persuaded and distracted by national and international politics, but focus right here and help create great outcomes. So I thank you for your trust in me, and I hope that I can gain your vote. Thank you.
All right, so that sums up. Hopefully everyone is so much more smarter right now, and we're ready to go knock out the day. So again, big thank you, Andrea, Mike, Laurel, for all you do for the community and for your participation in this forum. Again, thank you to our sponsors, First Security Bank, Blackfoot Communications, and of course, thank you to our audience that make this successful. Our November 13th forum is still, we're working through that. So please just check our Facebook page or our website for the next forum. So with that, have a great day.